We will jump straight back into our next guest. Sabine Erlinghagen has been CEO of the global digital grid business at Siemens Smart Infrastructure since 2019. Sabine holds a PhD from ETH Zurich and has extensive experience in the energy sector, with a focus on software as a service, customer success, and the Internet of Things. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sabine.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, Sabine will be presenting on microgrids. Please share your screen, Sabine.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greta. And I'm jumping right in to talk to you about microgrids and turning challenges into opportunities. When we talk about microgrids, what we really mean and how we think about it is in the context of the grid edge. That means the grid edge for us and where the microgrids are placed is where adaptive grids these days meet adaptive prosumers, so consumers and producers, and where decentralized energy resources are added to the grid at an enormous and ever-increasing pace. So what's happening in the system, I guess you've talked about that for the last 1.5 days by now, is the addition of decentralized energy resources. And that's happening exactly at that grid edge that I was talking about. So by 2035, of course, the world's electricity will be 50% of the world's electricity will be generated by renewables. And in some geographies, we are already at that order of magnitude. And in that context, we see a growth of microgrids growing by 19%, so almost 20% growth of microgrids. And also, if you follow the EU legislation and the directives, there's a big boost and a big tailwind for that, for communities to be more autonomous, to do self-generation, to share energy locally. And I think we've seen it in the trailer in the beginning, to reduce transportation costs and really generate the energy where it's consumed. So why are microgrids getting more important? It's, if I say microgrids and use the term, many of you will have thought about the real island mode and the place where it's disconnected from the grid. I'll show in a bit that it's much more than that. So it's about trading, it's about green certificates, it's about energy efficiency, it's about cost reduction, of course, CO2 reduction. It's about coping locally with a number of e-cars and optimizing energy consumption and generation and storage locally, and increasing the amount of renewable energy resources where they're added at the edges of the grid. Now, let's go into the term microgrid real quick and what are the advantages of a microgrid before I jump into a few examples that really illustrate that nicely. For us, a microgrid in the first place, and the very basic concept would be to get the transparency about what is the generation profile, what's the consumption profile, how are those energy flows going, how is the cost of those, and really being the master of your own energy profile and footprint, both in terms of cost as well as in terms of CO2. Now, of course, we need to push this further, and it's about really optimizing locally between consumption and generation and storage, and not only locally, but also take advantage and participate in energy markets. So really knowing what is the best time and the best place to feed back into the grid, to store and to participate in the different energy and flexibility markets that are out there to maximize not only the CO2 reduction, but also the economic return. And I come to that in an example later on. And of course, it's about optimizing the energy mix by adding especially storage to the mix. You can increase the amount of renewable and intermittent energy even more. And then last but not least, that's what came to mind maybe for a lot of you in the term microgrid. It's the option or the possibility to have grid independence and to go into island mode. But what we'll see is it's not all microgrids necessarily have that feature. All the other features are rich and a good reason to have a microgrid locally. Now, where do microgrids happen? For us, they happen almost everywhere. So it can be a campus, higher education, a university, it can be communities, it can be an industrial site. Think about the large industrial sites that we have not only in Germany but around the world. It can be utilities, it can be really islands. That's when the island mode in its true sense comes into play, and it can be any critical infrastructure. And let me jump into 3 examples to give you the different facets of all of this. First example is what you might call the classical one. It's Terceira Island, which is the Azores. So really, really nice place. It's also UNESCO World Heritage. And the challenge of the Azores was, how do I bring up the share of renewable energies without compromising on grid stability? And with that microgrid that we could, a solution that we could help them install, they could increase the share of renewables by 60%, really reduce the diesel consumption, because that's the classical option that you have if you don't go intermittent. If you are on an island, you have a lot of diesel, which obviously creates a lot of CO2 emissions. And we could reduce the carbon CO2 footprint by 3.5 thousand tons per year. So you can see the quote of the CEO of the electricity company in the Azores. And really it is about renewables plus reliability are not opposites, but they can go together if you have a smart solution to balance and to manage your microgrid in a really smart way. Second example that I wanted to highlight is a community in the US, and why that is very, very impressive is this is in California. And California, you know, there were all those wildfires and really harsh conditions. And you see the director of Sustainability and Government Affairs of Blue Lake Rancheria, and he said, when public safety power shut off, so when the wildfires were out there and for public safety reasons the power was shut down, all the surrounding communities were in the darkness. But Blue Lake Rancheria, we were up and running. So they kept the lights on, they had the infrastructure and especially the hospital running, which is a really big asset if the fires are all around you. And they could help not only their own citizens, but the neighboring communities to do that. And interestingly enough, also in the recent days when the pandemic started, the profile of the consumption very suddenly started to change. So people were in home office, factories were running at lower capacity in the very early days of the pandemic. And when that happened, the microgrid also locally could adopt, and they could adopt to keep the grid stable, to keep the local consumption and generation profile really in a balance, and were really nicely prepared also for that pandemic situation and keep their people safe and the network stable. So here also money savings, which for a community is a nice thing. I mean, you can buy a lot of things for a community for 200K per year, and also quite a substantial CO2 savings for them. And then last but not least, the third type of microgrid that I want to highlight real quick for you here is a water plant in Haßfurt, that is Germany. And you see the CEO of the local Stadtwerke, which is like again says there's security of supply and there's cost efficiency and sustainability. And what we did there is install a quite substantial amount of battery systems to have 100% reliable water supply using own PV generation and balancing that off with PV. And the interesting thing here, you see here 7-year payback period. Typically, if you invest in such heavy assets like PV and then a pretty substantial battery installation, then you would count 10, in this case, maybe more 15 years of payback period, which then starts to get long, I would say. Here we connect the installation and the microgrid to the energy markets. And with a return from the energy markets, we could reduce that payback time in the business case to 7 years. So cut that time in half. And you see the use cases there. It's about peak load shaving. You will have talked about, or you will talk about that, I guess, quite a bit here during the conference. Reactive power compensation and then harmonics filtration. So quite sophisticated also on the power quality aspects. And those are my 3 examples, hopefully giving you a nice tour around what microgrids can look like, and also what are the benefits. And I'm glad to take your questions.
And you've obviously showed a wide variety of applications here, but are there any limitations to microgrids? For example, certain geographical areas, economic conditions, or electrical systems where they aren't really a right fit?
I mean, look, it definitely depends on the geographical area and also on the markets that you can play in. So there's a little bit of planning, both on the technical side as well as so for the dimensioning and for which type of resource fits best. So whether solar or wind might be better, how much storage you need, and just get that technical feasibility right, and also calculate the economic return. So that's something where I guess we help all our customers with to really get that right, either with a short study or a good proposal to take that into account. But there's really no condition I could imagine where you wouldn't really find a solution to do an improvement on at least CO2.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm really sorry we're going to have to leave it there today. We've got a jam-packed schedule, as I mentioned before, but it was really insightful, really interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Sabine.
Thank you, Greta.